Was the Denver Broncos contract extension with Russell Wilson before the season a massive mistake? In hindsight, we could maybe say yes, but there's some other factors as well that we'll break down that led to the decision to extend him anyways. Plus, going forward, what do the Broncos do at quarterback beyond just Russell Wilson? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. The Russell Wilson contract extension is a major talking point right now amongst everybody in Broncos Country. We'll take a look at should they have done it? Was it a mistake? Why did they do it? We dive into all that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Locked On Broncos is here for you every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch on YouTube. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for making us your first listen of the day. Sayre, let's get into this conversation, right? Because yesterday's episode of the show, you and I felt like we dove deep. We looked at every angle of, is George Paton on the hot seat? Looking at his decisions he's made. What are some valid reasons that Broncos Country has legit criticism towards Paton versus the whole, oh my gosh, the season is not what we anticipated it to be. Fire everybody, the mentality that we consistently see when it comes to this sport of football. Now let's take a look at Russell Wilson's contract extension, because as you mentioned, you and I were talking off air, this is a major talking point right now amongst everybody in Broncos Country. So, should the Broncos have waited to extend Russell Wilson?
Well, Cody, this is something that I think we're hearing a lot. You know, you bring up the idea, was it a mistake to trade for Russell Wilson? I think a lot of people can see with a level-headed view to say, well, no, it wasn't a mistake to trade for Russell Wilson. Like I think most people would agree that's a trade that you make 10 times out of 10 if you're an NFL general manager. Obviously, there's going to be some exceptions out there listening along here that would say, no, I would not have traded for him. But I think that most people would say, yes, you make that trade. The thing that people are taking issue with is giving Russell Wilson this 5-year, $245 million extension before the season started, before you had an opportunity to see him go out there and really gel with his teammates. Obviously, I mean, George Paton has boots on the ground at training camp, so he's out there evaluating training camp. Like, I think a lot of times, Cody, too, we get a lot of comments, or I see a lot of things on Twitter that make it kind of seem like George Paton is operating from a standpoint of, well, he doesn't watch film, or he's not paying attention. He's not doing enough research on this, that, and the other. I would like to just point out that I think George Paton probably watches more film on these guys than anybody else. Or if he's not watching if he's not watching the film, he knows people he's trusting people on his staff, like the pro scouting department, all these different people that are watching the film to make an informed, collaborative decision. And so that's one thing that I think here. But if we're playing devil's advocate here, look, should the Broncos have waited to extend Russ? Here's a couple of reasons I think maybe yes, maybe you should. You didn't see him on the field with his teammates. And I think that really, Cody, the main thing is that now we're utilizing hindsight to be able to say, look, he's been playing hurt and he hasn't been playing well. Those are the two things that I think, like, when you're talking about doing an extension before the season, you're always taking the risk, right? With any player. Look at the Arizona Cardinals with Kyler Murray. They've got to be wondering the same thing. Did we make a huge mistake here? Or the Rams with Matthew Stafford. You know, did we make a mistake? Obviously, you know, they won the Super Bowl last year, but are they thinking going forward? I mean, we committed way too many dollars to Matthew Stafford here. Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, they're sitting there at 4-8, and he looks like he's, you know, not the same guy, or he's injured or playing injured or whatever. It's something that I think anytime you make a move in the NFL whatsoever, draft pick, free agent signing, re-sign a guy, give a guy a contract extension, you can always look in hindsight. But people need to understand, you pay a lot of times in the NFL for what a guy has done, not necessarily for what they're going to do. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, a different situation. You give him the $500 million contract over 10 years because he's a 24, 25-year-old player who has been an MVP at his position. You're paying him not just for what he's done, but what he's going to do. with a guy like Russell Wilson, you get a shorter contract. You pay him partly for what you hope he's going to do for you, but also for what he's done. And I think that's where the Broncos maybe and other teams are making these mistakes. You look at these contracts in hindsight and you see right now he's not playing well. He's playing injured, or he's if he's not playing injured, he's just playing bad in general. You look at him with hindsight and say, man, that was a bad contract.
Well, and I also think you have to apply the thought process here about the market. We all know the market changes every year for various positions, and all of a sudden you have guys like Lamar Jackson, who we all think and believe is going to absolutely reset the quarterback market at an astronomical level, far more than what we saw with Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. You have Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, these two guys, and potentially Jalen Hurts out of that conversation as well. These quarterbacks could change the market also. So it's also the process where Denver's like, okay, hey, we anticipate the market is going to change drastically when these guys get their big deals. And then that puts Denver at like, do we really pay? Like, do we pay $170 million? Do we do that? Like, do we look at that overall? Like, do we pay a guy maybe $55-60 million a year as we anticipate that could be the case? The NFL right now, I don't know where it's headed, but Lamar Jackson, because of what he's able to do, he's going to change the game drastically. And the Chargers are going to be in the same position. The Eagles in the same position. The Bengals in that same position. And I think ultimately you want to try to get ahead of that, right? Because we talk about like the bargains, like George Paton with Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, absolute bargain deals on those extensions. When you look at the comparisons, like guys like Christian Kirk and all the wide receiver deals we saw this offseason in NFL free agency. That is the name of the game. And yeah, has it worked out for Denver? Absolutely not. Like nobody expected Russell Wilson to play this way. And if you think that Russell Wilson, if you expected him to be like this, you're lying. Nobody did. That's why everyone was so excited. I bet you $50 we could go back to the YouTube comment section the moment that the trade happened, and I guarantee you we will just see nothing but, oh my God, yes, Super Bowl or bust, George Paton, executive of the year. Like, hindsight is a terrible way to live because so many people choose to do it, but it loses, as we say, we lose sight of the forest through the trees here when we get into this type of thinking. So I think it presents some very interesting points, which also leads to us talking about on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, why the Broncos extended Russell Wilson before giving him essentially, a chance to play down. Didn't see him in preseason, but why they were comfortable in doing that. We take a look at that coming up on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But before we do that, this episode of the show is brought to you by Turo. And Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., UK, Canada, and Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Or you can find an affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. Test drive that new electric vehicle that you had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. And many Turo hosts can even deliver the car directly to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. And our good friends over there at Audible. This episode is brought to you by Audible. And Audible, they're releasing a brand new slate of football podcasts that we're sure you're absolutely going to love. Find Block Forever now wherever you get your podcast. Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. Khalil sits down with star players, coaches, and former pros across the league to get real about what happens on the field and behind the scenes inside locker rooms, during team meetings, and back at the hotel. New episodes of Block Forever will be recorded and released every week ahead of Thursday Night Football, where you'll hear from Christian McCaffrey talking about his love-hate relationship with fantasy football and Juju Smith-Schuster giving his most honest opinions on other players and positions around the league. Available free on Audible or wherever you get your podcast. Catch the full Block Forever series available anywhere you get your podcast, available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game. All right, sir, continue on the conversation on today's episode with Locked On Broncos, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you're watching on YouTube. We just want to say thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. We appreciate you so much. Why did the Broncos give Russell Wilson a contract extension before having him play it down? We kind of alluded to it to the back end of the first segment about looking at the upcoming quarterback market. But I also think that when you look at Russell Wilson, you alluded to it earlier. You pay for maybe what you hope he can be, but you also pay a little bit for what he has done. And you mentioned it when we talked about the George Paton episode on whether or not he's on the hot seat. People are like, oh, he didn't watch Russell Wilson, the last year in Seattle, but he had a 15-3 touchdown interception ratio, over 105 quarterback rating, and tried. Obviously Seattle didn't have a winning season. They lost some games while he was out. but he tried. Like, he came back way too early. I think we can all acknowledge that, but he still played. Like, his production level was still pretty dang good, despite the fact that one of the NFL's worst defenses in the entire league last year.
Right. And there's so many layers to this. Look, I think as we're even talking about this, as we're recording this episode, I'm kind of realizing, Cody, that the cons to re-signing Russell Wilson before the season really are just as much a projection as anything else. Really, what you're saying is I'd rather take the risk and say that he's going to potentially be bad versus I'm going to take the risk and say that he's going to probably be good, right? That's what you're saying as a front office. The Broncos, remember, everybody knows this. We traded how many draft picks to get him? 5 draft picks, 3 players. You get Russell Wilson and the 4th round pick back in return. You've already made a substantial investment in Russell Wilson. Why would you not, so to speak, kind of just like finalize that thing by signing off on a contract, right? I mean, that's part of the justification for this. And again, as the general manager making this trade, you're telling me that you're willing to go ahead and say, okay, we're giving up multiple firsts, multiple seconds, 3 players, 2 starting caliber players, and 1 potential starter. You're saying that you would be willing to go ahead and do that trade, but you're not willing to sign him to a market fair contract for what he's done, which is he's always been a top 10 quarterback. He's always played at a top 10 level. He's led his team to the playoffs umpteen times. Most wins for any quarterback in NFL history over their first 10 years. You're telling me that before the season started, regardless of who your head coach was, regardless of the supporting cast and how highly you thought of the Broncos O-line or their wide receivers or their running backs, or whether or not you assumed injuries would happen, you're telling me that you would make that trade and you wouldn't sign the guy to a contract. That's where I think that a lot of people kind of find themselves with their feet in their mouth, Cody. I mean, that's you're saying that, yes, I think the trade was a good trade at the time. Even looking back in hindsight, I would still do the trade, and take that risk. But I wouldn't sign him to the big, massive contract because why? Because you were willing to give up all this stuff to get Russell Wilson, a historic top 10 quarterback, likely future Hall of Famer, and get him into the building. Here's one thing that I think, Cody, on top of all that, part of the equation here that people don't consider is the fact that Russell Wilson essentially chose the Denver Broncos. Like, I know he wasn't a free agent, but he had the no trade clause, and he had the opportunity to say, I don't want to go here. I want to go here. I don't want to go here. He could have put together this whole list of teams. The reason partly that he chose the Denver Broncos, I guarantee you, is because the Broncos got the message to him somehow, or got the message to the Seahawks. Yes, they will give you a new contract if we trade you there. The new ownership situation, all those different factors playing in. Maybe Russell Wilson doesn't choose, quote unquote, the Denver Broncos if there's no promise of an eventual contract extension, right? And so before all this season played out, before Russell Wilson and the offense have been playing historically bad, worst offensive point output since 2000 through this amount of time, before all that happened, Cody, here's the thing. You bring this guy in, he's taken a leap of faith as well, right? I mean, the Broncos have been one of the worst teams in the NFL since Peyton Manning retired. Russell Wilson, a historically top 10 quarterback who's always played at a high level, he's leaving Seattle to come and play for your organization, to be that savior that everybody crowned him as when the trade went down, and myself included. And I'm not saying that everybody did that, but I mean, for the most part, that was the sentiment that you and I were finding. And so you're talking about a guy that left his situation to come and be that guy for you. He decided, I'm going to go to Denver. I want to be there. I want out of Seattle. I want to go be the guy in Denver. Him taking that leap of faith, Cody, is another part of the factor in the equation why you make this move to re-sign him before the season.
Well, looking at some of the comments too, right? I'm looking at the YouTube comments right now on the breaking news episode we did when the Broncos traded for him. We have a comment here. I have officially canonized St. George Paton into the pantheon of Broncos Saints. That's one of the comments. We've been talking about Rodgers so much with Wilson as the backup plan the whole time they're working on getting Wilson. Once again, we see a move by Paton we did not expect. Wish Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, and Noah Fant good luck at Seattle. Broncos Country is a new sheriff. This offseason has begun well and is heating up. I'm very excited about the moves Paton is about to make. I love how Hackett and Russ are going to fit together. If only we knew then what we know now. That was definitely one of those things as well. And then let me go through another one here. I saw a very interesting one. Great job, George Paton. Go Broncos. The Broncos have an alpha GM on their hands in Denver. Now, let's go to some of the comments here on the Russell Wilson contract extension that we have seen so far. Obviously, the mega contract that we had talked about. The comment section, if Wilson plays 5 or more years with Denver, he will be the second longest after number 7 with 16 10-year years in Broncos history. He did say he wants to play 10 more years. I wonder how many Super Bowls that will produce and how many of them they will win. Peyton is the man, and this is the sleeping giant of which he spoke. Watch out, league. Here we come. Mark my words. And then outside of that, can we say that this deal was a great value? Russell haters in disbelief that he took a team-friendly deal. It's just so crazy that we live in such a revisionist hindsight mentality because it allows, like, it really clouds the judgment that we were all going through at the time. This, to me, I think is where, like, the argument is like, oh, I can't believe they did this. I think there are valid arguments on each side, Sayre. Like, for me, I've been on the record saying I don't think that Denver should have extended Russ without seeing him play it down. I was like, oh, why did they do this? But I also understood that there were all these other contingencies, with other quarterbacks, the market, and the fact that you have this belief that he's going to be the guy in which you made this strong investment, which you described here in the segment, that you do make that move. Outside of that, I mean, we can all just sit here and say, like, we were bamboozled, like the Stephen A. Smith clip. We were hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. This is not what we have expected, and I think you have to give Russell Wilson another year to try to play better. You have to give George Paton another year to try to fix the mess that has been created. But this was the right move to make at the time, all circumstances considering, excluding what we know now. And I think that anybody in that situation would have made that decision. There are other teams trying to vie for Russell Wilson, like the Philadelphia Eagles. They struck out on that one as well. They're pretty happy with Jalen Hurts. But, I mean, Sayre, this also leads to another question. Looking at the quarterback position in 2024, it is evident Russell Wilson is here to stay in Denver. Denver made the investment. They're stuck with him. They can't get out of it. However, there are some other areas that they could look at going forward, especially at the backup quarterback position. That's something we'll dive into on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But this episode of the show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And ladies and gentlemen, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, such as hiring, Nathaniel Hackett to change the offense here, and not to mention trading for a guy like Russell Wilson. Knowing what you know now, is that a wager that you would have obviously tried to pay off with? Maybe not, but you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. At the time, that was the reality for the Denver Broncos in the situation. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's easy to create a free job post in minutes at LinkedIn Jobs. Then what you do is you add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you would like to hire. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. While we all sit here knowing what the Broncos quarterback situation will be like for at least the next 4 seasons in Denver, with not many options on how to get out of this contract here for the Denver Broncos, what do the Broncos need to do at quarterback going into 2023? Sayre, this is a very, very good question. I'm glad that you brought this up and presented this as an idea because right now, I mean, Russell Wilson has struggled. I think we can all be very open and honest saying Russell Wilson, like, while he's not solely to blame, he does deserve a fair share of the blame alongside Nathaniel Hackett, alongside other outside circumstances like injuries to key players, key talent, and personnel. These things all matter. But what do the Broncos do at quarterback going into this upcoming season beyond just Russell Wilson when you look at that quarterback room right now, how it currently stands?
Well, I think it starts with the 2023 NFL draft. And I know that, look, we spent these first 2 segments kind of talking about, hey, here's the justification for why the trade was made or why the contract was signed before the season. But at this point now, 12 games, 11 games in, whatever, we're heading into week 13 here, about to be 12 games in. You can kind of tell, okay, looking back on this, what are the things that we could have done differently, or what should we have done differently? If I flash back to the 2022 NFL draft, Cody, Malik Willis sitting there in round 3 seems like a pretty nice, option to have. If Russell Wilson is injured like he is this season, you could turn to somebody like Malik Willis to give you a dynamic option, even if, he's a rookie, maybe not going to go out there and play, be able to throw you 50 passes in a game or something like that. But I think looking back in hindsight, the duo of Brett Rippon and Josh Johnson, with all due respect to them, was not good enough in terms of having a contingency plan, having a good backup plan in case Russell did get hurt or anything like that. And right now, I think you have to look at the 2023 NFL draft first and foremost, and you have to say, we are going to draft somebody between rounds 2 and 4, somebody that not just to get a body out there at training camp. Like, I'm not talking about the Broncos waiting until after the draft, signing some random, Jack Crosby or something like that after the draft and saying, hey, this guy's going to come be our 4th camp arm. No, I'm talking about your offseason plan has to include, we're going to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster in 2023. One of them is going to be a developmental guy. Another one is going to be an upgrade at QB2. And the developmental guy, in my opinion, has to come between rounds 2 and rounds 4. It can't be after. I don't think the Broncos need to take a quarterback in the first round. I think that would be, just imagine adding that to the fray at this point. Not to say they couldn't do it if the right guy fell, like if they were like, if we love Anthony Richardson or we love Hendon Hooker or something like that, go ahead and take them. But if you're just taking a QB just to take a QB, that would be bad in my opinion. But from rounds 2 and 4, I know the Broncos don't have a pick in round 2 right now, but eventually they might. And so I think that that's your range that you're looking at right now. Specific names, Cody, I haven't done enough research on the NFL draft to know, hey, these guys are definitely going to be available in rounds 2 to 4. I don't know if anybody really knows that at this point, but I think that's the rounds that you're looking at for this sweet spot right here to bring in a legitimate developmental guy to say, okay, maybe not in 2023 he's going to play unless absolutely desperately needed, but by 2024 we could see that potentially happening, and it doesn't prevent you from drafting a guy in round 1 of 2024 if Russ doesn't play well in 2023.
Well, I also think you can maybe look at it through the lens, right? Can you find like your Jordan Love situation, right? Because now look at where Packers fans are at with Aaron Rodgers. Like, they're done. Like, Packers fans are kind of done with Aaron Rodgers, and they had Jordan Love step in this past Sunday night, and all of a sudden they're like, let's see Jordan Love finish out the season. Jordan Love has literally been a guy that's been sitting, waiting in the wings, and you wonder, like, why did they even draft him in the first round initially when he just sat for the first 4 years of his career? And obviously you're going to have to make a decision at some point. Maybe you find a guy like that. I think the whole Jalen Hurts analogy thing is good as well, right? Because they took a flyer on him in round number 2, and they didn't have any aspirations of him starting his first season in the NFL. However, we've seen him grow over time, which is great. Developmental piece, as you said. Can the Broncos do that here with Russell Wilson? And when I look at the timeline, we're getting ready to enter the 2023 season. Denver's stuck with Russ for 2023, 2024, after 20, and even after 2025. If you can maybe get out of the contract after 2025, but there's like a 3-4 year window period there. Do you have that here if you're the Broncos? Is this the quarterback class you look at? Is Arch Manning going to sudden, rise in the next 2 to 3 years, and all of a sudden maybe Denver's in a position to get him? I don't know. Like, these are so many hypotheticals, but I do agree that Denver has to take a look at the position beyond just Russell Wilson, because while you're tied to Russell Wilson, he isn't going to be your solution forever, even though he wants to play 10 more years. I don't think he's going to be in Denver 10 more years unless he turns it around, which at this point, Sayre, seems very unrealistic. So Denver, once again, finding themselves in a quarterback controversy, not in a sense of like bringing somebody in, but the outlook right now at the position is not very good based on what we're seeing. And if it doesn't improve next year, then we're really going to be sitting here saying, oh my goodness, like, yeah, this was arguably the worst trade in NFL history. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully Russell Wilson could find a way to play better. Hopefully the Broncos instill an offense that does better. Hopefully Denver can stay healthy. But these are like so many like hypotheticals. What if? What if Tim Patrick never got hurt? What if Javonte Williams never got hurt? I feel like the offense would look entirely different with those guys. But then again, here we are. Like, there's a saying out there, if my aunt had huevos, she'd be my uncle. So this is where we're at, the state of the Denver Broncos here. Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts down below. What should the Broncos do at the quarterback position, just beyond Russell Wilson? Should they upgrade at QB2 going into next season? Other guys available, Taylor Heineke, who all of a sudden has emerged as the starter ahead of Carson Wentz. There's another name out there that we haven't talked about. And now Taylor Heineke has a 5-1 record as a starter for the Washington Commanders. Mike White mania is running wild in New York. This is a weird time in the National Football League. Let us know your comments down below in the YouTube comment section, or you can tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. The Broncos back on the practice field here on Wednesday. We'll have all the coverage and recap on the storylines coming out of the Valley with Jerry Jeudy. Will KJ Hamler return to action this week? You get that here, Locked On Broncos.